In the vastness of space, long past Earth's memory, humans have conquered the stars and mastered faster-than-light travel. However, light speed poses a new issue for humanity. The speed of light is too fast to properly navigate space, leading to 1 in every 10 ships being destroyed in the process of light speed travel. The spice, melange, in extremely concentrated quantities can give the user the ability to foresee a path into the future, and the guild navigators use this ability to guide their ships through the dangers of the cosmos. Without the ability to travel at light speeds, humans couldn't travel between planets, and the entirety of the Imperium would collapse, making spice the most valuable substance known to man. Although it only resides on 1 planet in the entirety of the known universe, a vast desert planet where giant sandworms remain the rulers of most of the surface world in which the spice can be mined. A planet where water is as valuable as gold and death is a matter of life. The planet known as Arrakis. Dune. Hey everyone, welcome to my Dune review. Thanks for checking in. So today I'm going to be talking about Frank Herbert's Dune, and if you haven't read the book or watched the movie or watched the Sci-Fi miniseries or watched the other movie and you care about spoilers, stop watching now because I'm going to be talking about spoilers throughout the whole video. But if you don't care, keep watching. So I'm just going to get right into it. So Dune opens up. We're given this political climate where the entirety of the known universe is under the Imperium, ruled by an emperor. But to keep balance of power in check with the emperor, all the great houses of the Imperium have a council known as the Lance Red. Not very important. To keep his power in check if he were to become too tyrannical. And so our story focuses on mostly 2 of the main houses and kind of the other one because the emperor himself is part of one of the houses. So I'm going to start talking about House Harkonnen, and I have a quote here from the Manual of Muad'dib by Princess Irulan. To attempt an understanding of Muad'dib without understanding his mortal enemies, the Harkonnens, is to attempt seeing the truth without knowing falsehood. It is the attempt to see the light without knowing darkness. It cannot be. So, at the very beginning of the book, it's very clear that we won't have an understanding of what our heroes are doing if we don't understand what the villains are doing in turn. So, I'll just get right into explaining House Harkonnen. So, the leader of House Harkonnen is the great Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who is said to be so fat that he has mechanical spheres into his fat deposits in his body that float up so that allows him to move. Because he's so disgusting that he just keeps eating all the time because he feels like it. He also rapes children and has slaves and stuff. So they're pretty obviously evil. There's an anecdotal quote. It's not a quote from any scripture in the Dune universe, like many of the other quotes I'll use, where one of the characters comes across Giedi Prime, which is the Harkonnens' home, and after 5,000 years since the Harkonnens' downfall, spoilers, there is still a film of oil over everything on the planet. After 5,000 years, the Harkonnens have left their stain, and it's not going away anytime soon. So they were so evil that that planet is just disgusting for the end of time. So that's how evil they are. And they control the planet Arrakis, or at least they did at the very beginning of the book. But immediately, the Emperor gives away Arrakis to one of the other great houses, House Atreides. And it's important because Baron Harkonnen swore to take the House Atreides head, Duke Leto's head, and to hold the Atreides signet as a symbol of their rivalry. Well, rivalry is putting it lightly. Mortal enemies is more like it. And so the Emperor has told them to give away Arrakis to House Atreides, and obviously they're pretty mad about that. So next I'll explain House Carino, which is the house that the Emperor Shaddam IV presides over. Now, we don't know much about House Carino in general. Even in the later books, they don't really go into it, even though we explore them a little bit more. The important parts of House Carino is that the Emperor is from there, so they're basically the most powerful house. And the Emperor has an army of warriors that he harvests from his prison planet, Soliza Secundus, which is the main planet of House Carino. And they have those prisoners there, and they use the horrible, tough climate of Soliza Secundus to shape the warriors and make them the strongest fighting force in the universe, so no one can really question his authority, even if they wanted to. And so Shaddam IV is actually afraid of Atreides gaining favor in the rest of the great houses. So you might think, well, why would he give him Arrakis if he was afraid of his power? That's just giving him more power. But the Shaddam's plan is to give the Arrakis to House Atreides to give the Harkonnens an excuse to wipe out the house entirely. And he's going to help them with that, but he keeps it on the hush-hush. So that's our enemies. So now I'll get into the Atreides, who are the good guys, kind of, the protagonists. So at the beginning of the story, we have Leto, the house of the Atreides, the head of the Atreides household, and they preside on the planet of Caladan, which is basically the complete opposite of Dune, where instead of desert everywhere, it's an ocean paradise planet where there's abundant water and vegetation and food, and it's basically a full paradise. And so the Emperor, now that he's given Arrakis to the Atreides, has upswept the entirety of the royal family and throw them on the planet completely opposite, completely unfamiliar to them. And also they have pressure from the Harkonnens because obviously they know something's going to be up. They know there's going to be spies. They know that something's afoot because the Emperor wouldn't just give them Arrakis for no reason. So at the beginning of the story, to sum it up, the Emperor is staging a situation in which the Harkonnens can invade Atreides' land and wipe them out and kill the Emperor, so that the Harkonnens can get what they want, and the Emperor doesn't have to worry about his power going away. And so that's the situation we start with. So next, I'm going to be talking about the Bene Gesserit, who, in the context of the world, they basically hide in the shadows and control every part of the great house, of each of the great houses, in their own special little ways. The leader of the Bene Gesserit works with the Emperor directly, and Duke Leto's wife and Paul's mother is, well, she's not his wife, concubine, is a Bene Gesserit, and the Harkonnens also have to answer to the Bene Gesserit. So all the houses, even though there's this huge conflict, they all are answering to the same people, and the Bene Gesserits are basically puppet masters, pulling the strings so that they can get what they want. And their goal is to enact their breeding program in order to stage the next evolution in human life, and they basically want to do that so that this person, who they call the Kwisatz Haderach, who is where their breeding program is going to converge, they want him under their control so that they can use him instead of it being used against them in the far future. And so how this fits in is that, Paul's mother, Jessica, is a Bene Gesserit, and it was her job through the Bene Gesserit breeding program to give Duke Leto a daughter, and only a daughter. But Jessica loved Duke Leto so much that she wanted to give him an heir, which completely shat the bed on the Bene Gesserit breeding program, because on the Harkonnen side, they were grooming a son to marry Paul, essentially, and then their kid was going to be the Kwisatz Haderach. At least that's what their thinking was. And there are a couple other characters throughout the series who are like faux Kwisatz Haderachs, where they were pretty close, but the Bene Gesserit realized that they were going nowhere, so they abandoned them. But since Lady Jessica had a son, a lot of people within the Bene Gesserit think that Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach, and it's kind of interesting to think why people thought Paul would be the Kwisatz Haderach and not Fade Rautha, the Harkonnen's son. No one ever talks about him being a Kwisatz Haderach, but maybe that's because he was just raised by the Harkonnens and he's kind of a meathead. But how they keep control of all these great houses and all these planets, because they're everywhere. Everywhere there's a planet, there's Bene Gesserits pulling the strings, and they have this thing that they started a long time ago called the Missionaria Protectiva, where they planted seeds of religion in every civilization that they could find. And they were basically blueprints so that the religions of these places would branch out, and they would basically understand where the religion would go and how it would evolve, so that if they were ever stuck on that planet, they could use it to their advantage. So here, I have a couple of quotes about the Missionaria Protectiva in relation to Paul and Jessica, who on Arrakis, during their stay there, are basically seen by the desert people, the Fremen, as holy figures, because Lady Jessica and Paul are exploiting the Missionaria Protectiva for their own personal gain, instead of just the way the Bene Gesserit normally use it, because they're in an emergency situation, and that's basically what it's for. So, with the Lady Jessica and Arrakis, the Bene Gesserit system of sowing implant legends through the Missionaria Protectiva came to its full fruition. The wisdom of seeding the known universe with a prophecy pattern for the protection of Bene Gesserit personnel has long been appreciated, but never have we seen a condition un extremis with more ideal mating of a person in preparation. The prophetic legend had taken on Arrakis even to the extent of adopted labels, including Reverend Mother, Canto, and Respondu, and most importantly, the Shari Panoplia Propheticus. And it is generally accepted now that the Lady Jessica's latent abilities were grossly underestimated. So that also gives an extra point to the Bene Gesserit that I haven't mentioned yet, right at the end there. So there's a lot of gobbledygook, but it was basically just saying that the way Lady Jessica used the Missionaria Protectiva in the book, it was the only time it had been used like that to actually put up a figure as a messiah, like she put up Paul inadvertently. But that last part, Lady Jessica's latent abilities were grossly underestimated. There is very, very rarely, I think maybe only once in the first book, where Jessica displays her abilities. And it's when they meet the Fremen and she has to make their worth known, essentially. And she kicks the crap out of them, which is important because the Fremen eventually kick the crap out of everyone. So the idea there is that even though the Lady Jessica is a high acolyte in the Bene Gesserit society, she's not even one of their higher members, the Reverend Mothers, who have to go through this whole process. But they're basically like the teachers in the Bene Gesserit, and Lady Jessica isn't that because she's part of the breeding program. But her abilities are incredible. She's basically stronger than anyone in the book except Paul at the end, and perhaps the highest what's her name? Mother Superior, Gaius Helen Mohiam. Jesus Christ. That's the name. She might be more powerful than Jessica, but she's old, so it's hard to say. But the idea there is that all the Bene Gesserit, in addition to their intellect and their religious construction, they're also extremely talented physically and could kick the crap out of anyone. So they're basically never truly in danger as long as the only danger posed upon them are other political enemies. And I got a couple more. I got another quote here. Let's see here. And so I talked about the term the Reverend Mothers, and they have to go through a trial. And so the idea there is what they do is they take a bunch of spice. Like, they concentrate it down till it's blue. And normally spice in the desert is like orange, and it's only blue in your body. But they kill a sandworm, harness all the spice they possibly can, and turn it into this drink that if you're not ready for it, it will just kill you. But if you're ready for it, you relearn the memories of all your past lives on the female side, for the Reverend Mothers, at least. And so to go through this trial, a lot of people can't take it and they die. So a lot of Bene Gesserit members won't do it because they think they're going to die. And a lot of people do it confident that they're not going to die, and they end up dying. But Lady Jessica has to do this in an untraditional way, because when she does it, she's on Arrakis and completely separated from the Bene Gesserit. But it's here that she kind of gets this, she gets like a power boost, essentially, where now she's already one of the more powerful characters in the story, and she also has access to all her past memories, which gives her a lot of wisdom. So here's the quote. "What had the Lady Jessica to sustain her in her time of trial? Think you carefully on this Bene Gesserit proverb, and perhaps you will see. Any road followed precisely to its end leads precisely nowhere. Climb the mountain just a little bit to test that it's a mountain. From the top of the mountain, you cannot see the mountain." And that's from the Muad'dib family commentaries by Princess Irulan. After the trials, a lot of Bene Gesserits struggle with being able to keep their own personality straight with all these endless ancestors that they have to answer to. And so when using their abilities, they basically have to, if they use them too much, they're not going to get anywhere. Because if you just follow a road exactly what it says, precisely to its end, and nowhere else, you've gone nowhere, because your destination was the end of the road. You've made it there, but there's nothing there. Let's see here. More quotes. Aha. Here's another one. It has to do with the Missionaria Protectiva. So part of the Missionaria Protectiva that was left on Arrakis was the concept of the Lisan el-Gaib, which means something in Arabic, but I don't know what it means. Essentially is a person from another world that was brought here to lead them. And, the Bene Gesserit obviously could use that because all the Bene Gesserit are going to be from a different planet, and so if they're stranded here on Dune, they're going to want the people, the Fremen, to think that there's some sort of religious figure, and the best way to do that is just to say, your Messiah is going to come from somewhere else. So, another caveat, part of the myth was that he would learn things, or he would know things that he has not learned of the planet, and he would already know all their rituals, and he would already know how their daily life was, but he would never have done any of it before. So, many have remarked the speed with which Muad'dib learned the necessities of Arrakis. The Bene Gesserit, of course, knew the basis of this speed. For the others, we can say that Muad'dib learned rapidly because his first training was in how to learn. And the first lesson of all was the basic trust that he could learn. It is shocking to find how many people do not believe they can learn, and how many more believe learning to be difficult. Muad'dib knew that every experience carries its lesson. So, the reason that Paul may be so smart, if you don't believe that he was really the Messiah, and the book makes it pretty clear that he's not really actually the Messiah of their legend, and that he's just the Kwisatz Haderach fabrication of the Bene Gesserit, is that the reason he was able to learn all this stuff is because in his training, he learned how to learn, which is something the Bene Gesserit have to do. They learn patience, and they learn how to learn. Otherwise, it'd be impossible to learn all the secrets of the Bene Gesserit in a lifetime or two. And I think I have one more quote about the Missionaria Protectiva in the Bene Gesserit. Aha. Yes. This one's interesting because it is just this one. What this comes from? It comes from the Collected Legends of Arrakis, and so it's like an annotation. It's still written by Princess Irulan, but it's an annotation in the historical context of the story. And it came to pass in the 3rd year of the Desert War that Paul Muad'dib lay alone in the Cave of Birds, beneath the Kiswa hangings of an inner cell, and he lay as one dead, cut up in the revelation of the water of life, his being translated beyond the boundaries of time by the poison that gives life. Thus was the prophecy made true, that the Lisan al-Gaib might be both dead and alive. So, there's another one. We don't hear the Bene Gesserit side of that one like we do with some of these others, but it's very obvious that they wanted the Messiah on Arrakis to be someone who could become a Reverend Mother, which most men can't, but Paul can because he's a proto/actual Kwisatz Haderach, and so when he takes the Reverend Mother test, he passes, which males get access to both their male and female sides when they go through this change that only happens a couple of times in the story, because most of the time when they go through it, men just die, and the women only get their female half. So that's part of the reason why the Reverend Mothers were looking and creating a Kwisatz Haderach, because someone with memories of both their male and female sides would be twice as effective as even the Mother Superior would be at learning things from those memories. So now that I've talked about all this other stuff, we can finally talk about the main character. So, I'm going to start this section with the only quote I have referencing Paul, specifically, that I'm going to talk about, because every quote in this entire book, and in the next couple ones too, essentially, are all about him anyway, but this one actually talks about him specifically. This is from A Child's History of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan, so it's like one of his other history books, but it's it's for kids. So, at the age of 15, he had already learned silence. So, when we think of charismatic leaders, we tend to think of people who are loud, proud, and in charge. But Paul wasn't any of that. He was not a particularly strong kid. He was only 15 when he landed on Arrakis. The only muscle tone that he would have had, essentially, is through his training and wading through the deserts through Arrakis. So he was not quite grown. He wasn't a huge guy. He wasn't super strong, very obviously. But he possessed this power through the voice, which is something the Bene Gesserit used, and his own voice, to shape the people around him. And his abuse of the Missionaria Protectiva was basically what allowed this, because he didn't have to make a big show of who he was and the powers he possessed, because even if he just showed someone something, everyone knew. All the Fremen know about their legends. It's ingrained in their society. So when Paul knows things about their society inadvertently, just by passing observance, they find it to be religious revelation. So in his small acts, they get amplified by by how the Missionaria Protectiva was so ingrained in the Fremen society. And so Paul was raised to be Duke. That's what his dad, the Duke Leto, always wanted for him, and that's why Lady Jessica gave Duke Leto a son, so he could have an heir, which is not something that everyone gets. at least the Bene Gesserit don't allow everyone to get that, which kind of shows how controlling they were over this breeding program, and that even the great houses would bend the knee to it if the Bene Gesserit needed. Like, even the Emperor himself has no male heirs, at least at this point in the story. He has only daughters, because they're basically all Bene Gesserit breeding program members, and they're just slave concubines. So, like, even Princess Irulan doesn't have a claim to the throne, because the Bene Gesserit want to use them for themselves. So they're just, like they are. They're just puppeting over the entirety of the empire. And so Paul was raised to be a duke, and to be a mentat, which in the world of Dune, a mentat is someone who essentially has the brain power equivalent to like a quantum computer, which are illegal in the Dune universe because of something known as the Butlerian Jihad, which is basically where they just killed all thinking machines. And it's why there's not thinking machines in the story. It's like a device that allows that shapes the sci-fi world as it is, so that the story works out. Like, no, not everyone's just using a computer all the time. And so Paul was raised as a mentat because his dad thought that a mentat head of a great house would be perfect. He'd be the perfect leader because he would be able to analyze everything and make the perfect decisions. And maybe he was right. He was probably wrong because, but it's not that important why he's probably wrong. But it didn't matter that he was probably wrong because also he was just raised by the Bene Gesserit, and against the Bene Gesserit's wishes, Jessica raised him and trained them in the Bene Gesserit way, which eventually screwed him up in the head to the point where his mentat abilities went crazy. But I'll talk about that later. But so that was his training. Those two training methods for how his mental abilities work. The Bene Gesserit training, control over the muscles, and mentat training, control over the mind. And he was also trained by his Duke sword masters and his weapons masters and his elite generals. He's basically just being grown to be a duke, and also he has the powers of these crazy female witches because his mom is a witch. So that's who Paul is at the beginning of the book, and he finds out both of these things at roughly the same time. He knows about the Bene Gesserit, and he understands kind of what they are-ish, but he has no idea why anything, why any of it, why do they have control of their muscles, why do they control political people, why do they have this breeding program. He doesn't know anything about the why. All he knows is that he was born as a son when he should have been born as a daughter, and so at the beginning of the story, Mother Superior Gladys Mohayim, I think was her name I read earlier, comes in and gives him this test that all the Bene Gesserit have to take, where you have to put your hand in a box, and it hurts really, really bad, and you can't take it out. And it's not just a can't take it out because you'll fail. People who take this test, if they fail, they get killed. So if you take your hand out of the box, if you even move it for a second, you die. So Paul is given this test, and while it's a little difficult at first for him to control his emotions, after going through his Bene Gesserit training, going through what he's learned, he's able to calm himself to pass the test, so he lives. And Mother Superior leaves Jessica, saying that it would be great if he was the Kwisatz Haderach, but he probably isn't. Which Jessica is constantly throughout the book wondering if he is or isn't, and also sometimes when she thinks he is, she thinks it's a good thing, and most of the time when whether he is or isn't, she thinks it's a bad thing. It's kind of like a worrisome type situation where she's worried that eventually that because he's the Kwisatz Haderach, and she maybe he got jumped into this situation before he could fully develop, that maybe he's not the best guy to be in control of like all things in the known universe. And she's right, but it's kind of her fault anyway. But so that's how Paul starts his journey, and he is the Duke's son. So he, even though he doesn't really want to be Duke, and his father understands that, he knows that it's his duty. So when it comes, he's going to take charge. So now I can actually get into the actual story of the book, now that I've set up and explained just about every lore detail I possibly could. Alright, so now to get into the nitty-gritty. Well, I just got out of the nitty-gritty. Now that you maybe understand all the lore, I'll be able to walk through the story without having to explain stuff every second. So I'll start by talking about the beginning. So I just talked about the test that Paul had to go through, and that's in the very beginning of the book. And right after that is when the Atreides have to move to Arrakis. And so the whole family and the house moves in, and we see that the Harkonnens have left things in shambles, and they've left the things for the spice mining operations. So stuff's broken, and they didn't do any help, even though there are people there, and there's a specific person who's supposed to oversee this change. I think they're called the Chancellor of the Change or something like that. And they're appointed from the Emperor, who we know is in on this, to go in and make sure everything's going okay. And so they just kind of lie. Go, yeah, there's nothing I can do. This is just how it is. Sorry. And, obviously the Duke is mad because if he can't, if he's given this spice mining operation, he won't be able to get it back up to the amount that they need in time, because the Emperor didn't want him to. They want him to fail. They don't want him to gain any financial standing before the Harkonnens attack and wipe out the entire house. Throughout the beginning of this section, there are attempts on Paul's life a couple of times. That we see things where the Harkonnens plant things that make people nervous of each other, and a lot of people think that Lady Jessica is the problem, and a lot of people think that because the Duke and her aren't married, even though it's a decision on the Duke's part to not get married. People are suspicious of her because she's this witch, and they don't know her real objectives. Because she's a member of the Bene Gesserit, and no one really likes them too much. At least not the people who aren't in charge. They don't like the Bene Gesserit very much. They call them witches, and they don't understand their abilities. So they're all nervous of Jessica, but in reality, the doctor, the royal family doctor, who no one suspected, because in the Dune universe, there's a certain type of doctor known as a Suk doctor that goes to these schools where they're trained to the point where they physically cannot harm people. It's kind of like how doctors it's like an ethics type thing where you're not supposed to bring harm to your patient, but in the universe of Dune, it's implanted in them, and it's kind of like Mentat training, where it's just it makes it so that's how they are. And so no one expects him, because everyone thinks it's impossible for him to do this. But the problem is that his wife was captured by the Harkonnens. And you'll see a lot of the characters in this book, their entire motivation is shaped by their relationship with the Harkonnens. If they've met the Harkonnens, then that's their personality. They hate them. And Dr. Yue, the royal family's Suk doctor, his wife got captured by the Harkonnens and tortured, and the Baron told him he would be able to rejoin with his wife if you help us take over House Atreides. And he's saying, okay, anything for my wife, because the Harkonnens are such monsters that he would do anything to stop her suffering. So he basically lets the Harkonnens in the front door. He poisons the king, or the Duke, and he poisons Paul and Jessica, and leaves them to the Harkonnens. But he's not so stupid and he realizes that the Harkonnens might not at least hold up their end of the deal if they even have the capacity to. And so he gives the Duke a fake tooth that can spray poison gas on the Baron, which it would kill the Duke, but the Duke's going to die anyway. So it's Yue's way of getting revenge, and with Paul and Jessica, he leaves them this care package so that they can escape and survive if they can, if possible. And so there's a couple passages. There's one from the children's history of Muad'dib. It's Dr. Yue, a million deaths would not be enough for Dr. Yue, because he was the one who betrayed the Atreides household. And so history looks at him like a Benedict Arnold or a traitor like that. While in reality, without him, there may not have been, Paul and Jessica may not have escaped at all. And even though the Duke doesn't actually end up getting revenge on the Baron, he does kill a bunch of people in the royal, small council. So without Dr. Yue, none of this was possible. Of course, his suspicions were right, and the Harkonnens had already killed his wife, so when they said he was going to rejoin with her, they were just going to kill him. And that's what they do after they arrive. And they invade, and they basically wipe the floor with the Atreides, because the Emperor gives him his huge swath of his Sardaukar warriors, which were the warriors that were shaped on the prison planet. And so they wipe the floor with the Atreides troops because, one, the Atreides is used to fighting against the Harkonnen warriors, who are not as strong as them. And they were fighting Sardaukar, which are the strongest warriors in the universe, and then they were outnumbered. It's said that the transport to carry this invasion cost the equivalent of 70 years, 70 years of the Harkonnen mining operation on Arrakis. So this whole stunt cost the Baron 70 years worth of profits just to kill the Duke and get his planet back. So it's going to take probably another 70 years to pay it back. So it gives you an understanding of the scale of this invasion, and also what he was willing, what the Baron Vladimir was willing to do to kill the Duke, because now he has complete control of Arrakis, now that he's gained control of it. As far as he is concerned, the Duke's dead. He's told that the Jessica and Paul are dead because they were dumped out into the desert, and no one will be able to survive in the desert for that long. Obviously, he's wrong, but I'll get to that later. So now, after the invasion, our characters are scattered. I haven't mentioned some of the side characters because a lot of them aren't that important unless you talk about them in passing, because they don't have a lot to do. But Paul and Jessica are now wandering the desert, trying to survive, and eventually they meet up with the Fremen. But now I want to talk about this middle section of the book where Paul has his transformation from 15-year-old ducal heir to Emperor of the known universe, and he has this transformation in his personality after meeting with the Fremen truly for the first time in the desert, but the seeds of it start when he notices how the Fremen act around him, and that they already kind of see him as this sort of messiah figure. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about Paul's journey through the desert. So after he's dropped off, or he and Jessica are dropped off in the desert with their supply package given to them by Dr. Yue, has the suits that they need to survive in the desert, along with a little bit of food and knives and stuff that they would need to kind of fend for themselves. And they eventually meet up with this group of Fremen, who are the desert people of Arrakis, and the Fremen are noticeably standoffish with them, even though there is someone among the group who knows Paul and Jessica, because he was a liaison to the Atreides house while they were still a governmental body on the planet. But this was, the Harkonnens invaded, and the Fremen probably just thought, oh, well, here's to another 70 years, am I right? And they just kind of gave up on it. But now they see Paul and Jessica, and they're like, well, you guys just got wiped out. What use could you be for us? And this is where Jessica kicks the crap out of one of them, and they're like, okay, maybe you guys can stay, but you have to prove yourselves. And Lady Jessica already did. And at some point, and this is where the end of the movie, Dune Part 1 ends, is Paul's fight against one of the Fremen, who I can't remember his name because he's only in this part, and kills him to take his stand as a member of their tribe. Basically serving as, like, in the governmental hierarchy of Arrakis, in the Fremen society, Lady Jessica is fine by herself, but she's a woman, so Paul has to kind of be her, or Paul doesn't let her be her own warrior that protects her. He is the one that represents them in the Fremen society. It's kind of weird, but that's why he has to kill someone, and then so they're allowed to stay. And this is where, during this time skip that happens, where Paul meets the love of his life, Chani, a Fremen woman, and they have a kid together. In this, I think it's 3 years, Jessica goes through the Reverend Mother transformation, because there was a wild Reverend Mother, which is a thing where Bene Gesserit, like, people that were on planets, passed along the Bene Gesserit traditions through societies, and they just lost contact with the rest of the Bene Gesserit societies, so there will just be random Reverend Mothers on planets that the Bene Gesserit isn't very active in, that'll just be out in the wild, and that will have these, ancient memories of Bene Gesserit society, but like this one has been disconnected from the Bene Gesserit for some time, so all the ancestral memories are mostly from Arrakis. Anyway, she's about to die, so Jessica has to take her place, because the Reverend Mother had become a sort of religious figure in the Fremen society. So when theirs died, they needed someone new, and of course, who else but this brand new witch that we just met, because she already knows how to do it, and so what the hell, right? But there's a little bit of a problem, because Jessica, I haven't mentioned this yet, has been pregnant this whole time. She's not really showing, but she's a couple months along. Paul knows it. She knows it because the Bene Gesserit have perfect information about their entire bodily chemistry at all given times, so as soon as she got pregnant, she knew, which is a weird thing to think about now that I think about it, but Paul could also sense it because of his Bene Gesserit and Mentat training. He could understand what was happening based on the way Jessica was acting. But why this is important, that she was pregnant while she went through this, is that she went through, it's known as the spice agony, and so did her unborn child. So in that moment, her unborn child gained consciousness and also gained memories of all the ancestors, including Jessica up to that point, and all the information that Jessica learned, but their baby barely even existent in Jessica's uterus. And so when the daughter is born, and her name was Aaliyah, she's like Jessica, and I'll talk about the concept of being preborn when I talk about Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, because they don't really talk about it that much here, but the Bene Gesserit call these preborn people who have consciousness, even though it's not really their own, before they're born. They call them abominations, because if you don't have your own personality and you have the ancestral memories of your entire ancestral line, there are some people in that ancestral line who will try and influence your decisions to the point where they basically are controlling your every move and have possessed you. And they call it possession. It's not like being possessed by a ghost. It kind of is. It kind of makes sense. So Aaliyah is one of these people, or she's an abomination, but she's not possessed yet. It is after the time skip, near the end of the time skip, I should say, when we come back to Paul after he's integrated into Fremen society. He also goes through the spice agony, and that was the quote where I talked about him being both alive and dead at the same time. He's in a coma for like 10 days, I think. And when he comes out of it, he can start to see into the future. And there was a section while he was in the desert where he saw a vision into the future, but it was only for a brief time, and he saw two things. He basically saw a diverging path, where one of the paths was a religious jihad bent on destroying all that wasn't Fremen society, led by him in his name, Muad'dib, which is his Fremen name. And the other side, he was standing in front of the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen in the throne room, and he said, "Hello, grandfather," and it freaked him out so much because he had basically learned that his mom was the Baron's daughter, which she did not know, and he keeps to himself. And it's a important thing. The Atreides bloodline is already linked to the Harkonnen bloodline, and because of the Bene Gesserit breeding program, it's kind of weird, because that means Paul, the female Paul and Fade Routha, if they had gotten together, would have the same grandfather, so it's kind of weird. But I think, it's just a breeding program, I guess. I guess they all would probably end up being a little weird. But it's like a crazy thing to him, because he now sees it as obvious. He sees the Harkonnen trace in his mom, and he sees it in himself, and he sees it in his sister. And it's clear as day to him. But almost everyone that they know that has dealt with Harkonnens, like I said, they base their entire personality on how much they hate them. So even the slight knowledge that Paul is a Harkonnen himself would make people go crazy, and they wouldn't listen to him. They wouldn't have trust in him like they did his Duke, because he has Harkonnen blood. So that's so now he's gone through the spice agony. Sorry, I trailed off there. And he just keeps seeing into the future, and he calls it wavelengths, or waveforms is how he sees into the future. So here's a quote from Private Reflections on Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. "Prophecy and prescience. How can they be put to the test in the face of an unanswered question? Consider how much is actual prediction of the waveform, as Muad'Dib referred to his vision image, and how much of the prophet shaping the future to fit the prophecy. What of the harmonics..." Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Let me try that again. "What of the harmonics inherent in the act of prophecy? Does the prophet see the future, or does he see a line of weakness, a fault, or cleavage that he may shatter with words or decisions, as a diamond cutter shatters his gem with the blow of a knife?" It's saying that Paul can see into the future, but can he see into the future, or can he just see a path that he can take to shape the world into that future? The answer is the second one. Spoilers. Because it goes back to that old Bene Gesserit saying, where if you walk a path just to find the end, you're only going to find the end and nothing else. So Paul, now that he can see into the future, in this future that because he does not want the Baron Harkonnen and the throne one, that one's out of the question. But he also doesn't want this huge religious jihad in his name. So he's kind of conflicted, and he's basically trying to find decisions where this holy war doesn't happen, and it's impossible. He does not know if anything he's doing is working, because he still just sees the same future. But he doesn't know if he can even change the future, or if his prevention of this... or his attempts at prevention are just making it worse. So that's that idea. Is Paul just following this path that he sees in front of him, word for word, or is he shaping a path, and his abilities just tell him how to shape the path? And again, like I said, it's the second one, but you only really see that effect go through in the later books. So here's one, another quote of this is from him. This is from Arrakis Awakening, which, from what I would gather, is probably a book about how Paul got shaped into who he is. So this is perfect. He was a warrior and mystic, ogre and saint, the fox and the innocent, chivalrous, ruthless, less than a god, but more than a man. There is no measuring Muad'Dib's motives by ordinary standards. In the moment of his triumph, he saw the death prepared for him, yet he accepted the treachery. Can you say he did this out of a sense of justice? Whose justice, then? Remember, we speak now of the Muad'Dib who ordered battle drums made from his enemies' skins, the Muad'Dib who denied the conventions of his ducal past with a wave of the hand, saying merely, I am the Kwisatz Haderach. That is reason enough. So, at the beginning of the story, he's just kind of this meek ducal heir. He has this sense of royalty about him, but he doesn't feel he's ready to lead. But after sitting in the desert and being shaped by it and seeing this future constantly that you're going to have a holy war, you're going to have a holy war, and you're going to lead it, he just went, I don't need to explain my decisions anymore. I do things for the things I want to make the future that I want. That's the decisions I make. That should be good enough. I can see into the future. You can't, so don't question me. And so he really gets that way after his first victory against the Harkonnens and House Carino at the end of the book. And so he basically discards his notion of stopping the jihad because he realizes that it is impossible. It's not impossible either, but that's a whole other thing. So how Paul gets shaped is how I'm going to lead up into the end of the story, because it shows how the decisions end up for how the book ends. So I'll talk about that next. Okay, so before I get to the actual ending, I'm going to talk about the only problem I have with the entire book, which is Baron Harkonnen's decision after he learns how Paul and Jessica disappeared, that he eventually stops caring. When he initially hears this news, he goes, well, I don't have their bodies. I don't know if they're dead. And they're like, all the people go, I don't know what to tell you. No, nothing could survive in that desert. Like, all the scouts we went to go look for them, none of them have come back. We don't know where they are. They must be dead. And the Baron's skeptical about this for a while until the time skip. And then after that, it's during this time skip where his nephew, I think, Raban, who's not that important. He's basically he is the Lord of Arrakis. He is in charge on Arrakis instead of the Baron Harkonnen himself. Like I said, it's like feudal society. And so during the time skip, Baron Vladimir just says, "Okay, they must be dead." Raban, squeeze this planet for as much as you possibly can. I spent 70 years to get this planet back. 70 years worth of money to get this planet back. You better give it to me in half that time. And during the time skip, Raban has been hearing about this character, Muad'Dib. All the other Fremen are talking about this Muad'Dib. We hear rumors about the Muad'Dib. Our spice harvesters are getting attacked by the Muad'Dib. We don't know who this guy is. And the Baron goes, let them have their religious fun. Who cares? It'll keep them docile. Which is the stupidest thing he ever says in the entire story. And I don't know where this comes from. It seems to me like the Baron is pretty clever, and I just don't know if he's just blind to the Bene Gesserit in its entirety, and maybe that has something to do with it, but he knows Paul and Jessica disappeared into the desert and no one was ever able to find them. And then this figure, everyone in the Fremen Society starts talking about, and he just tells Raban, don't worry about it. I don't care that they're attacking spice harvesters. That's not my problem. That's your problem. Fix it. I don't really care. Let them have their fun. And so, leading into the very end of the book, Muad'dib has been waging a war on this. That's what they call it, the War of the Desert. That's why in the year 3, after he takes the spice agony, it's been 3 years, and they've been attacking spice harvesters and stuff. They call it a war, but like Raban tells his dad or uncle, or he tells the Baron that they're like a pest, essentially. But he's getting nervous about it because it is costing him money, and it's starting to become a problem because even though they're only just attacking, they can only attack a couple of spice harvesters at a time. But the fact is they haven't stopped, and they're not stopping, so they're destroying them a little faster than they could be created, essentially, and so it's just a bunch of waste of money, and so he wants to oppress them, but the Baron won't let him. So eventually Raban stakes an attack on the Fremens after a big attack, and they go to it trying to capture Muad'dib, who's not there at the time, and they kill Paul's and Chani's son, who was named Leto, after the Duke, Leto II. And Aaliyah is captured, and they bring her to the palace where the Atreides lived while they were on Arrakis, because it's also where everyone lives on Arrakis, as in that city. So they bring him back to that palace, and Aaliyah is basically just toying with the Emperor, who the Baron brought down, because they went to this town, and they attacked, and they had Sardaukar warriors, and the Sardaukar warriors attacked the Fremen warriors, but they weren't Fremen warriors that they were fighting. They were fighting Fremen women, Fremen children, and the elderly. And the Sardaukar, these troops that they brought that they thought they were going to overwhelm the Fremen, basically any other troop in the entirety of the known universe would have gotten stomped by the Sardaukar, but the Sardaukar barely made it out with their lives. They had to resort to using their ships' fuel thrusters as huge flamethrowers just to make it out alive with Aaliyah. And so they basically had to eviscerate anyone that came nearby, otherwise they were going to get the crap beat out of them. And the Baron doesn't quite understand the significance of it. He just says, oh, your Sardaukar must be getting soft or something. That must be it. And Shaddam is a little bit more concerned about this because his Sardaukar are the most powerful fighting force in the universe, and these women and children just kicked the shit out of him. Like, it was no contest, and they had to resort to crazy tactics just to get a prisoner. And the importance about Aaliyah is, one, she doesn't look like a Fremen. She looks besides the fact that she's lived in the desert, she has those looks where your skin gets a little darker, you have blue within blue eyes from the spice addiction, and your skin gets a little wrinkly because they live in the desert the entire time. Other than that, she does not look like the other Fremen. She looks like, Atreides and Harkonnen. And so they're a little worried, and they're also a little worried because this tiny little girl who... Leah's 2 in the book. The David Lynch adaptation makes her look a lot older, and the Sci-Fi adaptation makes her look older. I don't know what the new movie's going to make her look like, but it's supposed to be unsettling that it's a 2-year-old. She can't speak right because her mouth and throat vocal cords haven't fully developed, but she's speaking like an ancient wisdom giver, like an ancient wise person. and she was leading one of the troops of women and children that the Sardaukar fought against, this 2-year-old girl. And so, like, what the hell? What's going on? And so Aaliyah explains that, oh, I'm your granddaughter, and the Baron Vladimir's like, what? I don't understand. And he's like, there was never a sister. What's going on? They must still be alive. What's going on? And in this confusion, there's a sandstorm that rolls in, and Paul has essentially been waiting for for the sandstorm to roll in, and Aaliyah got herself captured on purpose. So she would be on the inside while the sandstorm came in, and Paul would have the entirety of the Fremen army surrounding the shield wall, which is the only place that people who aren't Fremen can live on Dune. And he uses nuclear weapons to destroy the shields while in cover of the sandstorms, because atomic weapons in the world of Dune are illegal. And you're not supposed to use them. So in the cover of the desert, he uses them. They break through the shield wall. Aaliyah uses the confusion and the loud noises to kill the Baron, using the same weapon that Paul was tested with at the beginning of the book, the Gom Jabbar. And it's after the Baron gets stabbed, and he like flops over immediately, like he basically just falls over. And in the David Lynch adaptation, they make it really dramatic, but she really just gets slashed, and he goes and kind of keels over. And the Reverend Mother Superior walks in, and she sees Aaliyah, and she freaks out because she sees what that is right away. She goes, "Abomination!" And she yells, "Shaddam, you have to kill her! You have to kill her now!" And Shaddam's like, this toddler just killed his political enemy, and this his advisor walks in, and she's screaming about this possession and abomination, and he's like, I don't know what to do, and the Sardaukar on the outside of the city are getting destroyed because the Fremen are riding on sandworms, and they're just wiping the floor with them, and it's basically a no contest. And Paul, struts in through the hall where they're at in this giant palace. Then this is where Paul started his journey on Arrakis, and here's where the book ends. He said, I want to take control of the known universe. And so, before that, Fade Raltha comes in, who has a couple of scenes. There's a good scene in the book where he's in this Harkonnen gladiatorial chamber, and he is like a decorated warrior, and he's like, everyone loves him, and he's a great fighter in this arena for entertainment. And in this interim, in this time skip, he's had attempts on the Baron's life, so that he could take his place on the throne. And he comes out, and he faces Paul, who, because of Lady Jessica's decision, instead of getting married and having children with each other, they instead have to fight to the death. Because even though Paul is already the Kwisatz Haderach, Fade Raltha is on the same level as him, even though I feel Fade Raltha is kind of a meathead, even though he's kind of clever. And they fight, and Paul wins. It's a little anticlimactic, but I don't know. What did you think? Paul was going to die at the end of the story, right? Okay, so he kills Fade Raltha, kills the Emperor, and marries Princess Irulan so that he has a right to the throne, and Paul becomes the Emperor of the known universe. And I forgot to mention one thing that was important to how Paul and his line of succession in the throne, it's a funny way of putting it, and you'll find out why later, how they govern, because Paul realizes that because he has control of the entirety of the desert of Arrakis, even though the Emperor and the Baron Harkonnen can technically politically control the planet of Arrakis, Paul at any given time could wipe out the entirety of the spice mining operation. It would take a lot of work, but he could do it with atomics. And so then spice would stop flowing in the universe entirely. And so the entire universe and the Imperium would collapse. And so the Guild, who I have not talked about a lot, but they're the people that transport things in light speed ships. So they're basically the entire skeleton of that holds the entire world together. If they don't get spice, their company goes down the drain. And their company runs the Imperium. So when Paul threatens to destroy all the spice, the Guild just sides with him. They don't let Shaddam call for reinforcements on Arrakis, and they don't let the Baron call for reinforcements on Arrakis, because if they do, Paul's going to destroy the planet. And so they're kind of like hands tied, and Paul uses this as he has this chokehold on spice in the universe, and he's not the most chokeholdy on it, not even close. As other leaders would be and have been. But he's the only one that ever threatened to destroy it in its entirety, and so that's why the war lasted a day instead of lasting years or even decades, because his first move was to make sure that his opponents didn't have any troops, and so he won. So Paul ascends to the throne, he controls the entirety of the known universe, and then the book ends, and they don't even tell you if the jihad happens or what happens, and Paul sees into Paul, it doesn't even know what's going to happen, but he knows he has to be the emperor, and he's going to try and stop it. And long story short, at the beginning of Dune Messiah, it's been just to give some context for the entire story, I think, to talk about the beginning of Dune Messiah, where for 10, 12-ish years, he's been a horrible tyrant and has caused a jihad he's tried to stop it to the best of his abilities, but the jihad goes across the entirety of the known universe and kills 61 billion people. So after all he did to try and stop it during Dune, it was all for naught. He convinced himself he was a messiah, and instead he was basically Hitler. But this last section is where I'm going to talk about. I'm going to read. There's a lot of passages from here, and I'm going to talk about my analysis of the book as a whole. Okay. So now that I've talked about the main plot of the entire book, and trust me, I left out a lot of details, if you'll believe that, I want to talk about what to take out of the book. I don't know what the book's about, interesting analysis of the book, and whatnot. So I'm going to start with a quote, and I'll lead in from there. So this is from the Collected Sayings of Muad'dib, so by the Princess Irulan. So allegedly, this is something that Paul actually said. Greatness is a transitory experience. It is never consistent. It depends, in part, upon the myth-making imagination of humankind. The person who experiences greatness must have a feeling for the myth he is in, and he must have a strong sense of the sardonic. This is what uncouples him from belief in his own pretensions. The sardonic is all that permits him to move within himself. Without this quality, even occasional greatness will destroy a man. And it's interesting where Paul, I wish we were given what time in Paul's life he said this, because this feels like something he would have said after Dune Messiah, but it is not. It can't be, because it's attributed to Muad'dib, and so if he had said it after Dune Messiah, it would not have been attributed to him like that. So, just curious. I don't know. I haven't read any of Brian Herbert's extended Dune lore book crap, so I don't. Maybe he explains that, or at least something like that. But Paul is basically explaining what happened to him. It sounds like a warning to others, and it sounds like the kind of warning you would give if you were some if you were a teacher or something, and you go, this is how I avoided this, and instead he's just saying, to me it reads, I wish I had been like this, because then I wouldn't have been destroyed. It would not have changed him like it changed him, because his greatness is in. Well, actually, I think he has 2 points of greatness. I think he's great in Children of Dune, and he has greatness in historical greatness in this, and also at the end of Dune Messiah. But for very, very short amount of time in comparison to where he's not, because if you think of, a lot of these passages come from historical texts within the story of Dune and its universe, and so if you take the works Dune as historical works within the story, you see that the first 3 books are basically the only points in Paul's entire life where he was great, and so it was the only points in his entire life that there was a story worth writing. And so his greatness in this book is freeing the Fremen from its oppression that it's known since the spice was discovered on Arrakis, essentially. Isn't that wonderful? And the thing about the fact that no man can be great all the time is that we saw that he really, really tried to stop his jihad, and it doesn't work. He can't do it. He doesn't know why. He doesn't think he knows why he can't stop it, and he just can't. He's physically unable to. He doesn't really understand why, and there are some things he won't try, but he's doing whatever he can to both live his life here and try to live his life in the future, and it's exactly that kind of stops him from doing it. Like, he's looking for the end of the road, and the end of the road's gonna find him. He just has to keep walking on it, and that's what he's doing, and that's what he's explaining in that quote, I think, at least. Let's see here, let's go to my next one I got on my notes. Of course, it's another collective sayings of Muad'dib by Princess Irulan. So, there should be a science of discontent. People need hard times and oppression to develop psychic muscles, which is kind of funny because he's one of the most powerful psychic beings in the entire, or prescient beings, really. Psychic is the wrong term, so I don't know why Paul uses it there. In the entire universe, and so he's saying to develop their psychic muscles, people need to be given through hard times, and his entire life he was pampered until he was in the desert for a little while before he was touted as a messiah in a society that worshipped him. So Paul accidentally developed his psychic powers within agony, which is true. It was invoked agony. He did it to himself, essentially, but he understood that that's what he would have to do to develop these prescient muscles. And so he, when he, I've lost my train of thought. So this is really just less about his actual prescience, because there are not a lot of main characters in this book with prescience. Which is the ability to see into the future, if you didn't know what that meant. There are very few of them, and so when he's really talking about the Fremen, and we don't just see it in them, we see it in the Sardaukar, the Emperor's Sardaukar warriors, who they're just prisoners. They're trained on a prison planet. Their entire life is hell until they become a member of the military, because when he does it like that, that makes them strong warriors. And so that's exactly the desert power that the Fremen have. They were oppressed for years. They had to survive in the desert. Dune is basically a hell, and they developed their society within it. And so he's saying that's necessary, that humans just can't be all well and good all the time. And I maybe think he's saying that as an excuse for why he killed so many people, but it's, left to be interpreted. Alright, next one. Muad'dib could indeed see the future. But you must understand the limits of this power. Think of sight. You have eyes, yet you can't see without light. If you're on the floor of a valley, you cannot see beyond your valley. Just so, Muad'dib could not always choose to look across the mysterious terrain. He tells us a single obscure decision of prophecy, perhaps the choice of one word over another, could change the entire aspect of the future. He tells us, and here's one of his sayings, the vision of time is broad, but when you pass through it, time becomes a narrow door. And he always fought the temptation to choose a clear, safe course, warning, the path that leads ever down into stagnation. Yeah, I mean, that's basically this whole thing. The fact that so many characters can see into the future, and there's a lot of characters. Most of the characters that can see into the future in the Dune universe are basically just workers. But within the guild, who are the other people who use the spice for its prescient abilities, they also have the saying of moving into stagnation. If your path is always safe, then it's never not safe, and it's always just safe. It's never anything else but safe, because if you're afraid of change at all, away from the safety, then you're not going to go anywhere. So Paul is warning here in that quote that you're not supposed to keep your nose down. You're not supposed to huddle up in a bunker and just have life pass you by, because then nothing will happen. Again, he's right, but he's kind of like looking in on himself and being like, well, because again, another thing where I wish I would know when exactly this was written, because that whole thing of stagnation really hits its home in Dune Messiah, and you really see how he doesn't listen to his own advice, even though he knows what he's doing. He recognizes his own weakness, but he doesn't do anything about it. He just keeps walking the safe path. And so I think I have one last quote here from the book. Let's see where it's from. This is... Aha. Perfect. From the Manual of Muad'dib, by the Princess Irulan. What do you despise? By this you are truly known. So, I talked about it at the very beginning of the review. The entirety of the story is people reacting to situations they're put in. Everyone's relationship with each other, with everyone, with their friends, their family, it's all related in this first book to the Harkonnens. Paul, Jessica, the Duke Leto, they're all on planet Arrakis because the Harkonnens want to kill them. And all the other people, a lot of the people that work for the Duke, are former Harkonnen slaves or Harkonnen victims. And so it's like this empire built off of spite, accidental spite. And it's like this political spite where the Baron makes a move, but the Duke was never going to. Because he knew that if he fought one-on-one, he would win, and that was good enough. And he thought the Emperor would never do this to him, because the Lancerad would then vote him out of power, but he wasn't expecting the Emperor to do it in such a way that he was that he was actually revealed to everyone else. Basically, what I'm getting at is that Paul's relationship with everyone is shaped by the fact that he's a Harkonnen, the fact that his enemies are Harkonnen, and the fact that he was supposed to marry a Harkonnen. They basically all shape into these things that he hates. The Harkonnens, he hates the Bene Gesserit, and he hates for turning him into what he is, and he hates Feyd-Rautha, not because he even knows Feyd-Rautha, but because he knows that if he were born differently, that in this life, that Feyd-Rautha and him would have had a kid, and that probably screws them in a little bit. But I think after Aaliyah is born and grows up, he takes that mindset that he was supposed to be a woman and married this rival of his. And that, oh no, I wouldn't have been born as a woman, it would have been Aaliyah. Which is just him coping with the fact that he's Harkonnen and was going to have to marry a Harkonnen. if the wheels of fate had turned so predictably. So that's the end of my analysis and review of Dune. I didn't talk about the quality of Dune very much. I only talked about the one thing I don't like, which was the Baron Harkonnens on hubris. But this is an amazing book. You should read it if you haven't. It's got a lot of cool concepts and the lore of the world. While it feels like it gets bogged down in it in this first book, it's really not that hard to get through, and also gets way worse in all the other sequels. And that's really what I love to talk about. I 10 out of 10 book. Would recommend. Every library in the history of the Earth probably has at least a copy of this book. Watch the movie if you haven't. Watch the new movie. Don't watch the David Lynch one if you care about proper adaptations or good movies. But the Sci-Fi miniseries is very good. The effects are extremely outdated in my opinion, but the adaptation itself is pretty good. And they also adapted Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, which no one has done yet. So it's your only way to watch it through that. But I would recommend absorbing the Dune story from start to finish from somewhere other than ramblings on a YouTube channel. But thank you all for watching. I hope to have the review of Dune Messiah out next Friday. And I'm excited to... I'm excited to share all this stuff with you, and I hope you all enjoyed. Remember to subscribe, like, hit the bell if you want. If you don't, no big deal. Have a good one.